Hello and welcome back to another PC build. Now I've been really looking forward to this particular build, and when you see the parts I've got for the build, you'll understand why. Today I'm going to be building a PC in Lian's PC O11 Mini. And this is going to be another full step-by-step PC build guide where I'm going to show you how to put all the parts I've got in front of me together and come up with a fully working PC by the end of the video. As well as showing you how to put everything together, I'll show you how to install Windows 10, any programs and drivers we're going to need to get our PC up and running. As well, I'll show you how to install the RGB software and give you a demonstration of how it works. I'll show you how to enter the BIOS if our motherboard needs a BIOS update. I'll show you how to do that. I'll show you how to overclock the RAM, adjust the fan curves, and then at the end of the video, I'll run some benchmarks to give you an idea of the performance you can expect from this PC. So if you've never built a PC before, you've definitely come to the right place. So let's make a start by looking at the parts I've chosen for today's build. So as we've already mentioned for the case, I'm going with Lian's PC11 Mini, and I've got the white version here. If you're a follower of the channel, you'll know I've done a number of builds in the original PC11 Dynamic, and I was a big fan of that particular case. The Mini, as its name suggests, is really a smaller version of this case, but it has a whole lot of unique features which I'll point out as we go along. For the motherboard, I've got ASRock's brand new Z590 Phantom Gaming Velocity motherboard. And this is not only a great looking motherboard, but it has a whole host of great features which I've covered in my unboxing and overview video, and you'll find a link to that video in the description. So at the time of recording, we're still waiting for Intel's Rocket Lake CPUs to be released. So for the CPU today, I'm going with an i9-10850K. This CPU has 10 cores and 20 threads with a base clock of 3.6 GHz and a boost clock all the way up to 5.2 GHz. So this CPU should offer some great gaming performance, and as well with its high core count should perform well in content creation as well. Keeping our CPU cool, I've gone for a 240mm AIO. It's the Lian Galahad in white. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Team Group's T-Force DarkZ RAM at 3200 MHz. So I've used this RAM in a number of builds already and always been impressed both with its looks and how well it performs. For storage, I've got two M.2 SSDs from Sabrent. We've got a 2TB Rocket 4 Plus, and we've also got a 1TB Gen 3 drive. So although our motherboard will support Gen 4 speeds with one of the new Rocket Lake CPUs, with our i9-10850K, we will be limited to Gen 3 speeds. So you might be wondering why I've gone for Sabrent's blistering fast Rocket 4 Plus drive when we're not going to get access to its full speed in this particular build. Well, the reason for that is it's backward compatible with Gen 3, and then whenever I do get one of the Rocket Lake CPUs, all I need to do is drop it into the motherboard and the full potential of the drive will be unlocked. Powering the whole build, I've got a 750 watt, fully modular Platinum SFX power supply from Silverstone. It's the SX750. So if you are going to go with a different power supply, it is important to remember that you're going to need either an SFX or an SFXL power supply. And that's one of the compromises Lian had to make in reducing the size of this case compared to the original PC11 Dynamic. For the graphics card, I've gone with Nvidia's latest addition to their 3000 series cards, the RTX 3060. And the version I've gone with is MSI's Gaming X Trio, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this card performs in the benchmarks. For case fans, I've gone with Lian's new Uni fans, the SL120 in white. So I've not used these fans before, but they seem to get pretty good reviews online, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how they perform. Now this case will accommodate up to a maximum of 9 120mm fans, and that's exactly what I'm going to put in it. And the final item for today's build is some white cable extensions from CableMod. Okay, so that's all the parts, let's get on with the build. The first thing I like to do in any build is to prepare the case. By that I mean removing any panels, dust filters or anything else that's going to get in our way during the build. This case has a whole host of really cool features, different configurations, different layouts, so I'm actually going to spend quite a bit of time in this section pointing out all the case features as well. So we'll make a start by getting the panels off. The top panel is held on with 2 thumb screws at the back. Once these have been loosened, the panel can be pulled backwards and lifted away. At the top of the case, we've got a magnetic dust filter which can simply be lifted away. With the top panel removed, we can simply lift the side glass panel up from the bottom and lift it away. And the front glass panel is removed in exactly the same way. At the bottom of the case, we've got a full-length dust filter which can simply be pulled out from the front. The right side panel is held on with 2 thumb screws at the back. Once these have been loosened, the panel can simply be pulled backwards and lifted away. So as you can see, the case has 2 compartments. There's the front compartment and this is the rear compartment. In the rear compartment, you're going to mount your power supply. You've got a drive cage for 2 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch drives. We've got a cable management bar on which you can mount a further 2 2.5 inch drives. To remove the cable management bar, we've got a thumb screw at the top and a single screw at the bottom. I'm not planning on using the hard drive cage for this build. We're going with all M.2 SSDs. Our power supply is going to be here, and because we're going to be using cable extensions, we're going to need some space at the back of the case for our cables. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the hard drive cage. To access the hard drive cage, we need to remove this little cover which is held on with a thumb screw at the top. If you are going to be using this, I'll just show you how this works. At the bottom you've got a little screw which locks the drive trays in place. So we just need to loosen this little screw, slide it over to the left hand side. That removes the lock, so we're now able to remove the drive trays. So our hard drive cage is held on with 4 screws, 1 in each corner. So we'll go ahead and get these removed. And then I'm just going to go ahead and put this little cover back on. And you can see now the reason for doing this, we're going to have much more space down the bottom of the case for our power supply cables, which is going to make cable management at the back of the case much easier. The next thing I want to do is run you through the case accessories. So the first 2 lots of screws look fairly similar. We've got one with a little lip around the outside, and that is for securing your motherboard to the case and also for mounting 2.5 inch SSDs. These screws look fairly similar next to them, but they've got a fully rounded head, and these are for securing 3.5 inch drives. We've then got some slightly larger screws for mounting the power supply to the back of the case. We've got some standard fan screws. Then we've got these slightly longer screws and anti-vibration rings, which are for mounting your 2.5 inch drives to the removable bracket at the back of the case. Then we've got some additional standoffs and a tool for removing and then re-securing the standoffs. And you're going to have to move the standoffs about in the back of the case if you've got a different layout than the one that comes set at default. And again, that's something I'm going to show you in just a minute. We've then got 4 long screws and some thumb screws, and these are for securing the water pump brackets to the case. And down at the bottom here, we've got a range of different brackets for securing water pumps. And again, I'll show you how this works in the next section. Up the top here, we've got a motherboard extension and 4 screws to secure it to the case. And you're going to need to use this if you're planning to use either an EATX, an ATX, or a micro ATX motherboard in the case. The only situation where you won't need to use it if you're using a mini ITX motherboard. As we've mentioned, you can use a whole variety of different configurations in this case. And to do that, you're going to have to modify the back panel. And we've got 2 additional brackets here. And again, I'll show you how to use these in just a minute. And we've also got some cable ties for cable management. The next thing I want to look at is the different configurations that we've got for this case. And the whole of this back panel is actually modular. By default, it comes in the 7 slot mode, and we've got 7 bracket covers here. The different modes that we have are, we've got a 5 slot mode and also a 3 slot mode, and the motherboards that you can use and the positions of the motherboards varies depending on the mode that you're in. So like I say, we're set up for 7 slots. I'll show you how to configure for 5 and then for 3 slots, and then we'll go and have a look at each of the different modes and show you what it looks like. So the first thing to remove the panels, we're going to loosen the thumb screws over the GPU cover. Next, we're going to go ahead and loosen the thumb screws for the main panel itself. And then it can simply be lifted away. We've got two 2-slot panels down the bottom. Which can simply be lifted away. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to configure this for the 5-slot mode. So the first thing we need to do is to put one of the 2-slot panels on at the bottom. Next we need to go ahead and put the main panel on. And importantly, when you're tightening this up, it's this thumb screw that you want to tighten first. Then in the accessory box, we're going to get a slotted cover, which I'm going to put in at the top and tighten up. And then we can go ahead and put the GPU cover back on. So I'll go ahead and get these removed again and show you the 3-slot mode. Okay, in the 3-slot mode, we're going to start off with the main panel itself. And again, it's important that we secure this thumb screw at the bottom first. We can go ahead and put the GPU bracket back on. And then this time at the top, we're going to need to put the 2 slotted covers in place. So there you go, we're in the 3-slot mode. So I'm now going to show you the different motherboard layouts in each of the slot modes, starting off with the 3-slot mode. So in the 3-slot mode, it's only compatible with mini ITX motherboards. And I'm not sure how well this shows up in the video, but you can see we've got some standoffs screwed in already. And these are in the holes marked 7, so they're for the 7-slot mode. At the back of the case, we've got other numbers. We've got a 5 here, a 3 here. We've got 5M down here for 5 in micro ATX motherboards. So for us in the 3-slot mode, we're going to need to move some of these standoffs. So the 3 holes are here and here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these standoffs. So this is what the case looks like in the 3-slot mode with the only motherboard that's compatible, which is a mini ITX motherboard. And the big advantage of this is the amount of space you're going to have at the top and the bottom, particularly for thick radiators. So at the top of the case, you can mount either 3 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans. You can also mount a 360mm or 280mm radiator, and the space that you have for that is 100mm. Down at the bottom, the fans you can mount are the same, 3 120s or 2 140s. And again, you've got your choice of radiators from 360, 280 or 240. And the height is up to 75mm. Over to the right hand side of the motherboard, we can mount either 2 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans. You can also mount both a 240 or 280mm radiator. The maximum thickness for the radiator is 65mm with 140mm fans on it, or 85mm with 120mm fans. So we're now in the 5-slot mode, and I'm just going to move the standoffs into the 5 position. So this is what a mini ITX motherboard looks like in the 5-slot position. So at the top, we've still got the same fan and radiator mounting options that we did in the 3-slot position. However, the height for the fans and radiators has been reduced down to 65mm from 100mm. Down below the motherboard, again, the same fan and radiator mounting options are available to us, but we've actually got more space down below the motherboard. This time we can fit fans and radiators up to a maximum thickness of 110mm, up from 75mm in the 3-slot position. And everything over to the right hand side of the motherboard is exactly the same as with the 3-slot position. In the 5-slot position, we can also use a micro ATX motherboard, but to do that, we're going to need to install the motherboard extension bracket. To do that, all we need to do is slide the bracket in through the side of the case here, and then we just need to secure things into place using the 4 screws from the accessory bag. So just before we install our motherboard, we're going to have to move these standoffs into the 5 position, and then we're going to have to add 2 additional standoffs into the 5M position in the main case. So this is what a micro ATX motherboard looks like in the 5-slot position. Up at the top, we have exactly the same space and we're allowed to fit the same hardware as what we could with a mini ITX motherboard in the 5-slot position. Down at the bottom of the motherboard, we do obviously have less space than we did with the mini ITX motherboard, and we're down to 40mm instead of 110mm. And the other limitation that we're going to have by using a micro ATX motherboard is we can no longer fit a 280mm radiator down the bottom, although we can fit a 360 or a 240. And again, over to the side, everything is exactly the same as the other configurations. So we've now got the case in the 7-slot mode. I've put all the standoffs back to their default positions, and I've gone ahead and put a mini ITX motherboard in its position in the 7-slot mode. Now the one thing you'll notice is the space at the top of the motherboard is fairly limited, and that is the big limitation you're taking in using the 7-slot mode. And no matter what motherboard we put in this mode, the space at the top is going to be the same. In the 7-slot mode, you are able to fit either 3 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans, but you cannot fit a radiator at the top. Down below the motherboard, obviously there's no limitations as to the radiators or fans that you can fit, to the same as in the other modes. And you have a lot of space, 150mm of space between the bottom of the motherboard and the bottom of the case. And again, the space over to the right hand side is going to be exactly the same as with all the other configurations. To use the motherboard with a micro ATX board, we're obviously going to need to move the bottom standoffs into the 7M position. And the other thing we're going to need to do is to put the motherboard extension bracket back on again. Okay, so this is what a micro ATX motherboard looks like in the 7-slot position. There's absolutely no difference to what we can put at the top or what we can put to the right hand side. Again, we have no limitations on radiators or fans down at the bottom, but the space at the bottom has been reduced down from 150 in a mini ITX motherboard to 80mm with a micro ATX motherboard. Okay, so that's all the standoffs back in their default 7 position, and we've got the motherboard extension bracket on. Okay, so this is what it looks like in the 7-slot position with an ATX motherboard. And importantly, this is the only configuration that will support an ATX or an eATX motherboard. So we have exactly the same space and limitations at the top and over to the right hand side. The space below the motherboard has been reduced to 20mm. This means at the bottom we can still do 3 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans. Importantly, there's a thickness limitation on the 140mm fans now, and they have to be less than 20mm thick. We still can put radiators down the bottom of the case, and that is either a 360 or a 240, but because the motherboard extends down further, we no longer have the option of mounting 280mm radiator at the bottom. The case comes with 3 different brackets for mounting pumps. The first is the flat bracket, so the first thing you would do is go ahead and secure your pump to the top of here, and then we can set it into the case and secure it to the case with 3 thumb screws. The second bracket is we've got the elevated pump bracket. Again, we would go ahead and secure our pump onto the top of here and then set it into the case. And again, secure things into place with 3 thumb screws. And then, without tightening the thumb screws fully, we have a bit of side-by-side movement. You can get the pump exactly where you want it, and then go ahead and fully tighten the thumb screws and secure it into place. The third option is to install the pump on top of a radiator and set of fans. So it does come with 4 screws, which will allow you to secure your fan and radiator bracket to the radiator down below. Then you would go ahead and mount your pump on top of this separate bracket, and then you would just go ahead and slide this bracket into here, and then go ahead and secure the pump with 2 thumb screws. This is our motherboard, and we're going to do as much work with the motherboard while we've got it on the table, because it's much easier to work on a flat table than it is in the cramped confines of a case. So we're going to go ahead and install our CPU into this socket in the center of the motherboard. We're going to put the backplate on for our CPU cooler. We're going to install our M.2 SSDs behind these heatsinks and install our RAM into these sockets here, all before we put the motherboard into the case. To prepare our motherboard to receive the CPU, all we need to do is pull this lever out to the side and then lift it backwards. and then lift the slot cover back as well, and this is going to expose our socket. It's really important that we don't touch the socket because we don't want to damage the pins that are in the inside of the socket. If you look closely at the socket, you'll notice there's two little notches, maybe about 3/4 of the way down on both sides, and this is going to help us line our CPU up in the right orientation. This is our CPU, and what you'll notice is I'm holding it by the sides. The reason for that is I don't want to get anything on these gold contacts on the back of the CPU that will affect its contact with the pins in the socket. The other important thing to mention, if you look at the CPU, again about 3/4 of the way down on both sides, you've got a little notch, and that's going to help us line it up in the socket. To install our CPU, all we need to do is lower it down into the socket, lining things up with the notches on both sides, and that's it in place. Then all we need to do is close this little lever back down. There's a screw here that we just need to put it in underneath and then close it down. As we're closing it, the little cover will pop off and then we can just lift it away. Now, importantly, don't throw this out, because if you take your CPU out of the socket, you're going to need to put this back on to cover the pins and make sure they stay protected while there's no CPU in the socket. The next thing for us to do is to go ahead and get our backplate ready, and we'll get this backplate with our AIO. So we've got the side that says Intel facing up the way, and it's going to be these ones here that we're going to want to use. Although there's one hole, there's actually 3 smaller holes in the middle of it, and it's actually, we want our metal screws to come up through the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and insert it through and bring it up through the middle. Next, I want to take one of these little washers and push it over the top and all the way down. And then I'm just going to do the same thing with the other 3 corners. Next thing, all we need to do is line the back plate up with the motherboard. Next, we're going to want to put these spacers over the top. And then just to keep everything in place, I'm going to put these little thumb screws over the top. We will secure our CPU cooler with these eventually. The motherboard has 3 M.2 SSD sockets hidden behind the heat sinks. Only the one at the top will support Gen 4 speeds. The only problem is it will only work with a Rocket Lake CPU. So for our 10850K, we're only going to be able to use the bottom 2 sockets, and we're going to be limited to Gen 3 speeds. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the heat sinks from the bottom 2 sockets. So looking at just how our drives are going to mount, our top drive is actually going to be secured to this standoff, and then when we screw the heatsink in, this is going to secure both the heatsink and the drive. In the bottom socket, we're going to need to put a little standoff into this hole here and use a separate screw from the motherboard box to secure the drive before securing the heatsink on the top. So we'll make a start by putting this standoff into its place. Okay, so we just remove the little bit of plastic covering, and then we can go ahead and screw the standoff into its place. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert our first M.2 SSD just in at a slight angle, and then our second drive in down the bottom. Okay, as we've mentioned, I've got a separate screw from the motherboard box, and I'm going to use that to secure the bottom drive in place. Just before I go ahead and put the heatsink back on, there's some plastic protection on the back that we're going to need to remove. We can then go ahead and lower this into place. Same thing with the bottom heatsink, we'll go ahead and remove the plastic protection and then go ahead and line things up with the holes up beneath. The next thing for us to do is install our RAM into these sockets here. So we just need to go ahead and open the clips on each of the sockets. This is our RAM, and what's important to note is we've got 2 gold connectors down the bottom, and that's what's going to plug into the motherboard. Importantly, they aren't of equal length. The one over to the right hand side is slightly longer than the one over to the left hand side. So it's important we line it up with the socket the right way round. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and line the RAM up with the socket. Once I'm happy everything's lined up, I'm going to apply some firm pressure to the top. And what you'll notice, the RAM will slot into place and the clip will close. And it's just the same process with the other 3 sticks of RAM. We're now ready to go ahead and get our motherboard into the case. Importantly, I have put things back to the original configuration where all the standoffs are in the 7 slot, and we've got the 7 slot configuration at the back. As well, the motherboard extension bracket is in place. So a couple of things to mention. The motherboard I'm using has an integrated I/O shield, so I don't need to go ahead and fit my I/O shield into the case. If your motherboard doesn't have the I/O shield pre-applied, go ahead and fit it before you insert your motherboard. One of the nice things about this motherboard's I/O shield is it is flexible in position, and this is one of the nice features this motherboard has, so we're hopefully going to be able to get it lined up without any difficulty. The other thing to point out is I install my motherboard with the case upright, and the reason for that is to give you guys a really good look at it, but you will find things much easier if you put the case down its back. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and slide the motherboard into the case, lining things up with the I/O shield at the back. Next we want to get one of the screws in, and that's going to help hold the motherboard in place. And then it's just a matter of getting the other 8 screws into place. The next thing I like to do in any build is to get the case cables plugged in. So these are the case cables and they come from the front I/O. So we've got a HD audio cable which is going to let the combined headphone and microphone jack work. We've got a USB 3.0 cable which is going to let the 2 USB Type A ports on the top of the case work. We've also got a Type C cable which lets the Type C port on the top of the case work. We've also got our front panel connectors which include a power switch, a power LED and a hard drive LED, and they're going to let these functions on the top of the case work. So we'll make a start getting these plugged in. Okay, so the first cable to plug in is our HD audio cable, and it's going to go into this header in the far left hand side of the motherboard. So I'm going to bring it through from the back to the closest cutout. And if we look really closely at the header itself, you'll notice there's a pin missing in the top row, and there's also a pin missing in the cable itself. So we're going to have to plug it in the right way round, and that is with the HD audio text facing up the way. And then we can go ahead and just pull the excess cable through to the back. The next lot of cables to plug in is our front panel connectors, which are going to go into this header over the bottom right hand side of the motherboard. So we'll go ahead and bring them through the cutout. So each of the cables here is going to have to go into different pins on this single header. So it's really important you refer to the diagram in the motherboard manual to make sure you're plugging them in to the right pins. What I would recommend doing is starting with the bottom row and working your way up. In the video it looks like I've done it the opposite way round, but that was just to give you a good view of all the cables being plugged in. So starting in the bottom row, working from left to right, pins 1 and 2 are for hard drive LED positive and negative. So we're going to need to go ahead and plug that in with the text facing down the way. Moving up to the top row then, pins 1 and 2 from the left hand side are for power LED positive and power LED negative. So I'm going to go ahead and plug these in with the text facing down the way. Next to that we've got a power switch. It doesn't matter which way this goes in, but to keep things nice and neat I'm just going to plug it in with the text facing down the way. Then we can go ahead and pull the excess cable through to the back of the case. We can go ahead and plug our USB Type C cable in, just bringing it through this cutout here, and it's going to go into this header just here. So we'll go ahead and line things up with the header and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. Just above that we've got our USB 3.0 header, so we'll go ahead and bring that cable through as well. So importantly, there is a little notch on the header, and the cable itself also has a little notch on it, so we're going to want to line things up the right way. Be really careful when plugging this one in because it's really easy to bend the pins, so if there's any resistance, stop and line things up again rather than just applying excessive pressure. And then we can go ahead and pull the excess cable through to the back. The next thing to do is to go ahead and install our power supply. So this is our SFX power supply from Silverstone. I've gone ahead and plugged in all the cables that we're going to need. So we've got a 24-pin connector. We have got a PCIe cable which contains 2 8-pins, which is exactly what our graphics card is going to need. And this is the first time I've seen this. We've got a single cable supplying two 8-pin EPS cables, which are going to supply our CPU with additional power. I've also plugged in a SATA cable. Although we're not going to actually be using any SATA drives in the build, some of our controllers that we're going to use are going to need SATA power. Another important thing to mention is this is our power supply's intake fan, and we're going to need to install it with this facing the outside of the case. If we were to install it the wrong way round, the intake fan would be up against the motherboard and our power supply would overheat. So all we need to do is line the power supply up with the back of the case, and then we can go ahead and secure things into place using the 4 screws from the accessory box. Next thing to do is to plug in our cable extensions. So I'm going to plug in the 24-pin cable extension. And then we'll go ahead and plug the cable extensions for the graphics card. So although the cable extension kit I've got does come with white cables for the EPS cables, I'm not actually going to go ahead and plug them in. The reason for this is these are going to plug in right up the top of the motherboard, and actually when we install the fans at the top, we're not actually going to see the cables. So it doesn't make sense to use cable extensions, which are going to be more difficult to manage at the back of the case when we're not actually going to see them anyway. So our 2 EPS cables are going to go into here. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring it through this cutout at the top of the case. So importantly, there is a notch on the cable and there is a notch on the top of the header. So we need to line things up the right way and then push them into place. Okay, and then we can go ahead and pull the excess cable out the back. Next, we can go ahead and bring our 24-pin cable through this cutout. Now importantly, there is a little notch on the header and we've got a clip on the cable, so they need to line up. So it's going to be round this way here, lining things up and then pushing into place. So importantly here, we do have some cable combs on the cable which are going to help us organise the cable and make it look that bit better. The next thing for us to do is to start work on our AIO. Now our AIO does come with fans in the box, but because I want everything to match, I'm going to be using the uni fans on the radiator as well as case fans. So the first thing for us to do is to join 2 of the fans together. Really easy to do. All we want to do is line them up and then push them in together. Next, we're going to have to add one of the connectors. The connector has 2 wires coming from them. One is a standard 4-pin connector and one is a Lian RGB connector. So we'll go ahead and turn things around. All I'm going to do is line this little connector up on the side and then push it into place. Next thing for us to do is decide which way to have the fans on the radiator. For us, we can't fit our radiator at the top because we're using an ATX motherboard, so our radiator is going to have to go at the side. To get the best temperatures, what we would want to do is have our radiator set to an intake. It would be intaking cool air from outside the case, it would balance the fans better inside the case, and would give us much better temperatures. The only problem is the fans this way don't look quite as good. If we have it this way as an exhaust, our CPU temperatures definitely are not going to be as good, but it is going to look better. So I'm going to start off with our radiator set to an exhaust on the side, fully aware that it's probably not the best configuration for this case, but it is going to look the best. I am planning to do a lot of thermal testing in a separate video, and you can check that video out to find out what the best fan configuration. Once it's made, it'll be linked in the description of this video. So all we need to do is secure our fans to the radiator using the long screws that came with the AIO. Next, I'm going to go ahead and insert the radiator into the case, and then we can go ahead and secure things into place using the shorter radiator screws that came with our AIO. Then I'm just going to go ahead and pull the 2 cables coming from the fans through to the back of the case. And then we need to apply some thermal paste to the CPU. My preferred method is just to apply a pea-sized amount to the middle of the CPU. Now importantly, before we put our CPU cooler down, we need to remove the plastic protection. And then all we need to do is lower the CPU cooler down onto the back plate. Once we've got it to the right place, we just need to put the thumb screws back on. Then all we need to do is take a screwdriver and give each of these thumb screws a couple of turns before moving on to the diagonal one. And we're just going to repeat this until things are perfectly tight. And there's some plastic protection over the pump that we can remove. What I'm going to do now is bring the cable coming from the fans and the radiator through to the top of the case and plug it into the CPU fan header. So we'll line things up with the header and then push into place and then pull the excess cable out the back. Coming from the pump itself, we've got two wires. One is for RGB and one is a 3-pin fan connector, which is going to need to go to our pump header. So I'm going to bring the RGB cable out the back. And then the pump header is right next to the CPU fan header. So I'm just going to line things up with the header and push it into place. And then we're going to bring the excess cable out to the back. Now the other cable that we're going to need to plug in is to control the RGB on our pump. I'm going to connect these fans into the hub that controls the rest of our fans for RGB. So we've got an ARGB header at the top of the case, so I'm going to go ahead and plug the cable that comes with our AIO into it. So importantly, there is 2 pins, a gap, and then 1 pin, so we're going to need to line things up the right way. Okay, so that's that cable in, and then we're just going to bring the other 2 connectors out to the back. Okay, so I've got the RGB cable coming from the pump head, and then I'm going to plug it into one end of that adapter, which we have plugged into the addressable header at the top of the motherboard. That's it in place. Now the cable coming from this ARGB header does have a splitter on it, and there is another connector on it, and it is designed to plug the standard fans that come with the radiator into it, and then that one header will control all the RGB on the fans but also on the pump head. The only thing is, because we're using the uni fans, I want all the RGB on the uni fans to match. So I'm actually going to plug the uni fans in later on when I install the rest of the case fans. This is the controller that comes with our uni fans, and what you can see, it's got 4 channels, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So looking at each of the channels, it's got 2 different connectors. And this is where we're going to plug in the cable that we plugged in earlier on into each group of fans. So we've got a standard 4-pin fan connector, it's going to go into one side, and then we've got an RGB connector which is going to go into the other side. So it's going to treat whatever group of unifans we connect together and then connect into here as one group of fans. Coming from the other end, we've got a USB cable already plugged in, and we're going to need to plug this into the USB 2.0 header on our motherboard. We've got 2 spaces for 2 additional connectors. One of them is for SATA power, and it's going to power the hub. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in now. The other cable is for motherboard control. So it's going to let the motherboard control the ARGB if we plug this into the other 3-pin 5-volt addressable ARGB header on our motherboard. And if we plug this into a system fan header, it's going to let our motherboard control the speed of the fans. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this additional cable in as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring 2 of the cables from our Unifan controller through to the bottom of the case. So I'm going to go ahead and plug our USB 2.0 cable into this header down the bottom of the motherboard. Be careful which way you plug it in. If you look at the header, there's a pin missing in the bottom row to the far right hand side. So we need to look at the cable, and there is a hole missing in it. So we need to line things up the right way and then push it into place. And then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. The other cable that we're going to need to plug in is we're going to need to plug one end into a system fan header. So we've got one here. So I'm going to line it up and then push things into place. Final cable to plug in is another 3-pin 5-volt addressable ARGB cable, and we've got a header right next to the USB. Okay, so we just need to line things up and then push them into place, and then we'll pull all the excess cable out to the back. Next, I've got a group of 3 unifans joined together just the same way as what we did on the radiator. Importantly, we are going to want these as intake at the bottom, bringing cooler up to the GPU, so we're going to need to install them with the front facing down into the case. So I'm just going to pull the excess cables through to the back first of all, and then set them in to the case. And we'll just turn the case up on its end and get the fans screwed in. So we can go ahead and put the bottom dust filter back on. Then just before I insert the fan at the rear of the case, I'm just going to pass the cables from it up through to the back. Then we'll bring it up and into position. And then we'll go ahead and get things secured into place. And then we've got our final group of 3 fans, which we're going to secure as an exhaust up at the top. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and feed the cable out to the back, and then bring the fans up to the top of the case. And then go ahead and get things secured into place. The next thing for us to do is to get all the cables coming from the fans plugged into our fan hub. So I'm going to start off with the fans at the top of the case and plug them into slot number 1. So the 4-pin fan connector providing power and controlling the speed of the fans, and then the RGB connector. Then the fan at the rear of the case into number 2. The bottom fans into number 3. Then we just need to plug in the RGB connector coming from our fans on our radiator. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that into channel number 4. I'm not sure if that's going to work without having a power connector for the fan plugged in, but we'll soon find out when we go into the software. Final connector for us to connect up is the SATA power connector to power our hub. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it into the end of the power cable coming from our power supply. So we just need to line the L connectors up and push them into place. We're now ready to go ahead and install our graphics cards. We just need to remove the graphics card's cover at the side, and then we can remove the second and third bracket from the top. To prepare the motherboard to receive the graphics card, all we need to do is open the clip on the top slot. Then all we need to do is line the graphics card up with the slot. Once we're happy everything is lined up and in the right place, we just need to apply some firm pressure. The graphics card will slot into place and the clip will close. And then we can go ahead and secure the graphics card into place using the 2 screws that we removed earlier on. And then we can go ahead and put the graphics card slot cover back on. Next we can go ahead and plug in the power supply cables to the graphics card. Next we can go ahead and tidy up the cables using the included cable combs. Next we just need to tidy the cables up at the back, and we've got some Velcro straps in the middle to help with that. So we can go ahead and put the cable management bracket back on. Okay, so that's the build complete. Next thing for us to do is to flip the power switch and see if we get a boot screen. Importantly, I have loaded a Windows 10 bootable USB drive into the back of the PC. If you don't know how to make one of those, I've made a video on it and you'll find a link to that in the description. Okay, here it goes. Okay, so that's a good sign. We've got lights and we've got fans spinning. So we're just going to have to wait patiently and watch the monitor and see what happens. And this next step can take a little bit of time. Okay, so there we go. It's telling us on the screen to press F2 to run setup, or just press F1 to continue. I'm just going to go ahead and press F1 to continue. And there we can see the Windows icon is appearing, which means our computer has found the bootable USB drive in the back of the PC. because importantly there's no operating system installed on either of our SSDs. Okay, so that's us through to the Windows installation screen. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to install Windows 10, but to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to switch over to the screen mode. Okay, so over the next lot of screens, I'm going to show you how to install Windows 10. I'm going to pick the options that are relevant to me. Obviously, if you have different options, go ahead and pick the options that are relevant to you. As well, between all the steps, I'm going to go ahead and speed everything up. So I'm from the United Kingdom, so I'm going to click Next. I'm going to click Install Now. If you've got a Windows 10 product key, go ahead and enter it in the box. If you don't have one, you can still go ahead and install Windows 10. Click I don't have a product key, and then select the version of Windows you're going to get a product key for in the future. So I'm going to click Windows 10 Pro and click on Next. We have to accept the license terms, click Next. We're going to go for Custom Install. So you can see our two drives. Drive 0 is our 1TB M.2 SSD, and Drive 1 is our 2TB M.2 SSD. So I'm going to go ahead and install Windows on our 1TB drive. So I'm going to select it and click Next. And this next step will take a little bit of time, so I'll go ahead and speed it up. Okay, I'm from the United Kingdom, so I'm going to go ahead and click Yes and Yes again. I'm going to skip a secondary keyboard. So although I do have an Ethernet cable plugged into the motherboard, it hasn't been able to pick it up. So I'm going to go ahead and say I don't have internet. I'm just going to click on Continue with Limited Setup. I'm going to go ahead and type my name in, click Next. And then I need to create a password. I then need to create 3 security questions. I'm going to click on Don't Use Online Speech Recognition, click Accept. I'm going to let apps use my location, click Accept. Yes to find my device. Just the required data. No de-inking. No again. No again. Not now. So that's Windows installed. The one problem we have is we don't have an internet connection. And if I click on things, it doesn't show any internet connection available. And that's probably because we don't have any drivers installed. And without the internet connection, we can't go to ASRock's page and download the drivers. So I have downloaded the Ethernet drivers from ASRock's site on another computer, and I've got them on a USB drive, which I'm going to go ahead and plug in now. Okay, so I've got the LAN drivers here. I'm going to go ahead and open them and then click on it. Click Yes, Next, and Install. And then Finish. I'm going to go ahead and click on Yes. And you can see now down the bottom, we've got network with internet access. And I'll show you where I got the driver from later on, because there's plenty more drivers we need to install. The first thing I like to do in any setup is to get Windows fully up to date. So we click on the Windows icon, click on the settings, and then we're going to click on Updates and Security. And then Windows Update. So what we can see, Windows has already found plenty of updates here. It's going ahead and downloading them. It's going to go ahead and then install them. It's probably going to need to restart a number of times, but we're going to go ahead and let it do this until there's no more updates available. And it's only once there's no more updates available, we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, that's Windows fully up to date. Whenever I click on check for updates, there's no further updates available. The next thing I want to do is to get all our SSDs to show up. So we go to this computer. What you'll see is only one of our drives is showing up. We've got a 2TB drive which isn't here. So to get it to appear, we need to go down to the bottom menu and type in Disk Management. And then we'll click on Create and Format Hard Disk Partitions. It's going to tell us we need to initialize our drive. We're just going to go ahead and click on OK. And we can then see our drive has appeared down here. We just need to right click on it, go for New Simple Volume, Next, Next. It's going to assign the letter D. If we want to change it, we can do so from the pull down menu. Click Next, and then we can name it. Click Next, and Finish. And what you can now see, both of our M.2 SSDs are now showing up. Next thing for us to do is to get our drivers installed. And as I've already mentioned, I've installed the Intel LAN driver, which I got from here on another computer. So we'll go ahead and download our audio driver, the Bluetooth driver. We'll install the INF driver, the Intel Management Engine driver, the Killer LAN driver, and as well I'm going to go ahead and install ASRock Polychrome. It's going to allow us to control the RGB in the computer. Okay, so we go to the Downloads folder. And then I'm going to go ahead and extract all from each of the folders. Then we can go ahead and delete all the original compressed folders. Okay, so we'll make a start installing these one by one. Click yes, click next, accept, install. Okay, so we're going to need to go ahead and restart our computer, so we'll do that now. Okay, we'll just keep working our way down the list. So we'll install the management engine. Click yes. Click next. We're going to accept the terms. Click next, next, and then click on finish. We'll install the killer Lian. Click yes, next, install, and finish. Bluetooth. Click yes, next, next. We'll accept the license terms, click next. We'll go for typical install, and finish. And then the audio drivers. Click yes, next, and we're going to need to restart our computer, so we'll go ahead and do that now. I just realised I forgot to install the wireless LAN driver, so we'll go ahead and download it as well. So we'll click on setup, click yes, click next. We're going to accept the terms, click next. We'll just go for complete install and click next, install. And then we click on finish. So it's telling us we need to go ahead and restart our computer, so we'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, and we need to then go ahead and install ASRock Polychrome, and that's going to let us control the RGB on our motherboard. Click yes, next, next, install, and we'll click on finish. Okay, I'll show you how that works later on. Next, we need to go ahead and get the drivers for our graphics card. We can either get the drivers separately or go ahead and install the GeForce Experience. So I'm going to go ahead and click download now. Okay, we can go ahead and open the file and click yes. Okay, so we just need to agree and install. Okay, so you have an NVIDIA GeForce Experience account. You can go ahead and enter your details. If you don't, you can create one. I'm going to go ahead and put my details in. I'm just going to skip the tour for now. And then if we go ahead and click on drivers. So what we can do, if we click on these three dots up here, you can pick which drivers you want to install. If you use your PC mostly for gaming, you should install the Game Ready driver. If you use your PC mostly for content creation, it's the studio drivers that you want. I'm keen to test the gaming performance of this PC, so I'm going to download the Game Ready driver. So it says we already have the latest Game Ready driver installed, and if I click on check for updates, there's no updates available. Okay, there's one more bit of software we're going to need to install from Lian Li's website, and that's the L-Connect software to help control the RGB effects on our fans. So I'm going to go ahead and download it. I'm going to go ahead and open the file. Click on the setup, click extract all, click extract. So we'll click on more info and we're going to run this anyway. Click yes. Okay. Next, next, install, and finish. The next thing I want to do is to give you a demonstration of the computer's RGB software. Now I do have two packages installed. We've got ASRock Polychrome and Lian Li's L-Connect. We are actually going to be able to control everything using the ASRock Polychrome, but we are going to get more effects with the L-Connect on our uni fans, so that's the reason I've installed both. If we do want to control the RGB on our graphics card, we are going to need to install some software from MSI as well. I'm quite happy to leave it as Rainbow, which is the reason I haven't installed any additional software. So let's go ahead and open up the ASRock Polychrome. Click yes. Okay, so we can go ahead and click on the back button. Okay, so what we can see at the moment is that select all channels is selected. That's going to mean that everything on the motherboard and anything plugged into our ARGB headers is going to change color. If you want to control the individual components, you could, for example, select the AIO cover or the chipset, or either one of the RGB headers and change the effects individually. I'm just going to go for select all channels. Now they're currently set to rainbow. If we want to apply a different effect, for example a static effect, we can click on static. And what you can see, the I/O shield, the chipset hiding behind the graphics card, and also the Lian logo in the center of the pump of our AIO has all turned to white. What you'll also notice is our graphics card hasn't changed color, and I said that won't change color, and also our uni fans haven't changed color. If I drag this down to a red color, you'll notice the I/O shield, the pump and the chipset have changed to red. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back to white. If we want to control the uni fans, we're going to have to enable the setting in L-Connect. So I'll go ahead and open up L-Connect as well. So L-Connect is currently running, and what I would need to do is enable Motherboard Software Sync to allow our motherboard to control the uni fans. So I'm going to click on that and click on OK. And what you can now see is that all the fans in the case have turned to white. And the only thing that's not white at the moment is our graphics card. So if we go back into our motherboard software and say we want to set everything to a pinky purpley color and drag it down to the bottom, you can see now everything is changing color apart from the graphics card. And again, if we install MSI's RGB software, we can control the lighting on the graphics card as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put everything back to rainbow. So we'll go ahead and click on rainbow. And what you'll see, everything is now back to rainbow. You'll notice the effects on the uni fan don't look quite as good as what they did before. And that is the motherboard's rainbow effect. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to minimize this, open the L-Connect software again, and I'm going to turn off motherboard sync. And you see we've got a much nicer rainbow effect on the fans, which is the reason why I think it is worth installing this L-Connect software. Okay, so let's have a look at the fans that we've got installed. So we've got 4 different groups of fans. And remember, in group 4, we plugged the 2 fans on the radiator in. They're showing up at no revs per minute, whereas all the other groups have a revs per minute. And this just shows that it does work, providing RGB effects, but not controlling the fan speed. And importantly, we have plugged the fans directly into the CPU fan header, so that is controlling the fan speed in group 4. From a fan mode point of view, we're currently on PWM, which is letting our motherboard control the speed of the fans. If we want to set up a profile and allow this software to control the fans, we can, so we can set them to quiet mode. They're currently running in 800 revs per minute, and just click apply to all. If we want to go for full speed, let's try that as well, and click apply to all. So you'll notice now that all our fans have ramped up in speed, apart from group 4, but this has been controlled directly by the CPU fan header. So I'm going to leave things in PWM mode, apply to all, to allow our motherboard's BIOS to control the fan speeds. If we want to change the direction of the rainbow effect, we can as well, and I'm going to click apply to all, and that's going to apply it to all groups. If I just want to apply it to the group selected, I can do that as well. So I'm going to click apply to all, and then you'll notice the direction of the rainbow effect has now changed. I'll go ahead and put that back. If we want to apply a different effect, we can as well. So there's static color in here too. We can select white, and I can either apply it to one group. So if I do this, just apply, only the fans on the radiator should change color. And you see that's what's exactly has happened. If we want to change fan group 1, we can do that as well. Static color, white, apply. And you can see the fans at the top have changed color by themselves. If we want to apply it to them everything, we can just click apply to all, and we've now got everything to white. Let's have a look at some of the other effects. So there's breathing, apply to all. Color cycle. Runway. Staggered. Mixing. Meteor. Firework. There's stack. Stack multicolor. And then neon. Okay, so I think the two effects I like best are either everything all white or rainbow. So I think I'm going to go with rainbow. And then click on apply to all. The next thing I want to do is to head over to the BIOS because there's a few settings I want to adjust there. I did mention I would show you how to update the BIOS should our motherboard need a BIOS update. Over on ASRock sites, we've only got version 1 available, so I'm not going to be able to show you how to update a BIOS because there's no update available. To enter the BIOS, what we need to do is restart our computer. And then we need to press the delete key when the ASRock logo appears. It can be quite difficult to time things, so I normally start pressing delete once the screen goes black. So there's the ASRock logo. Okay, so that's us into the BIOS. We can see we've got version 1 of the BIOS installed, and that's the latest version available, so I'm not going to be able to show you how to update that today. Next thing to do is have a look at our RAM. We can see all our RAM is showing up, but it's currently only running at 2400 megahertz. There is an XMP profile available which will run at 3200 megahertz, which is what our RAM is rated for. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Auto to turn on the profile 1, and that then should enable our RAM to run at 3200 megahertz. Okay, the next thing I want to do is to have a look at our fans. It's got our CPU fan 1, which is the 2 fans on the radiator, and then CPU fan 2 is actually our water pump. For some reason it doesn't seem to have picked up any of our chassis fans, but it must just be the way they're connected up to the fan hub. So we'll click on advanced mode, and then if we work our way down, what we can see is that CPU fan 1 is working in standard mode, which is fine. I'm going to leave it in standard mode. CPU fan 2 is currently in auto. It only has 3 pins, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it to DC mode. It's probably running in this anyway. It's working in the standard mode and following the CPU temperature, so again I'm just going to leave it at that. And again, there doesn't seem to be any point adjusting any of the rest of the fans because they are currently being controlled by the fan hub. Okay, so to save our settings, we need to go ahead and click on Exit. And we're going to save changes and exit. And it's going to give us a summary of what we have changed. We've really only overclocked our RAM and changed the water pump from auto to DC mode. And we'll click on Yes. And then what will happen is the computer will boot back into Windows. Okay, the first thing I want to check is the RAM is now running at the correct speed. So we right click on the Windows icon, click on Task Manager, click on More Details, click on Performance and click on Memory. We can now see our RAM is currently running at 3200 megahertz. Okay, so that's the build complete. Everything's looking great, but also running well too. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some footage of the completed build, followed by some benchmarks to give you an idea of the performance you can expect from this PC. So if you've enjoyed the video, please remember to click the like button, and if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please click the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.